Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Chris, Jamie and Michael, back for another episode. The Entrepreneurial Family Man podcast. We're just guys who are crazy about our lives. We love our kids. And we still want to thrive in business. And we think we can have all of those. Live from Franklin, Tennessee.
Not just Franklin, Tennessee, but we are in a particular gentleman's office who helped start this whole adventure for us.
Yeah, we're not going to say who it is, but it rhymes with Stan Biller.
We're at Dan Miller's office. That's right. We are here at the Sanctuary. Dan Miller, we are just wrapping up a full day of masterminding together and just having a blast, digging deep. We wanted to talk today about narrative, what we're telling ourselves, how we've been influenced by the environment around us from childhood up to today. Many things affect us. Our faith informs us, the family and friends we associate with, the books we read, the podcasts, so many things. They feed us a narrative. So let's talk about this, guys, because we want to talk about this, too, in the context of our Cuba trip. We got to see firsthand how narrative can impact people. But, Chris, when we talk about narrative starting from an early age, share with us something about your own personal narrative.
One of the huge moments in my life was when I was a freshman in college. We were on a tour over the Christmas break with people from I was at a liberal arts college, and we were in a large touring choir. So we were in upstate New York, and they were playing a game on the bus that had to do with like identifying a song that went with each person on the bus. And you didn't get to choose your song. It was chosen for you by your peers. So, you don't know what people are going to say about you. But by this point, we've been in college enough that we kind of sort of know each other pretty well. So their input was going to matter. I died when I heard the song that was chosen for me, because not only did somebody tell me what it was, like a couple of them had kind of conspired together and said, we think this is your song, but everybody else instantly went, oh my gosh, yes! Okay, so what's the song, right?
This is our bumper music right here.
This is our bumper music. Oh, man. Okay, so the song was the theme from Mahogany, and that was a show at the time, and the song is actually, Do You Know Where You're Going To? Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Where are you going to? Do you know? And it was such an empty question, because the answer for me was no, I don't have a clue where I'm going. And what I realized was that there was that narrative that I was operating on. I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. I'm in college because I'm supposed to go to college, I guess. I'm going to make good grades because I guess that's what you're supposed to do in college. Where is this leading me? I got no idea. And here my peers, this is freshman year, they already knew that was my narrative, and they're feeding it back to me. It was a massive wake-up call for me. It really just said, you better figure out where the heck you're going, boy, because the world recognizes you are a man without a vision.
So that song kind of lit a fire under you to figure it out and answer. That's good. Michael, when you grew up in a large family, tell us about how did the environment and the influence of your family affect maybe you and the narrative that you told yourself or accepted?
So I was really blessed with a great family. They were supportive, loving. My narrative got messed up outside of my family. It was actually within my church. At one point, my pastor was having a bad day or something. I happened to be over his house, and he just cut into me with words that broke me down and made me feel like nothing. What I walked away with after that experience is this narrative of, you are a coward and you can't stand up for yourself. Even if you know you're right, just stay quiet. Keep your voice quiet. Don't speak up. You're a coward anyway. Here I am living through my teens, my 20s, early 30s, with that narrative running through my head, thinking that, oh yeah, that's just kind of how I was made. It's part of my identity. It's not something that happened to me or not something I picked up. It's just who I am. Consequently, I get in situations that require courage or require me to stand up for somebody and say something, and I would shrink back. And so it was powerful.
That actually illustrates the power of narratives, because although that was a lie, it was spoken to you and you received it, and rehearsing it like that, then those narratives, those stories we tell ourselves, become a truth for us because we start to fulfill the prophecy. We start to live into that, whether it's calling us up or telling us, don't even bother.
Let me give you an example of what this looks like. In high school class, I have the answer to the question that the teacher is asking. And I could say it right there in that moment. But because I have this narrative in my mind saying, don't speak up, keep quiet, you might be wrong, you're a coward, I shrink back and don't say anything and watch all these other people chime in with the right answers. And it ended up, because I didn't get to speak my voice and say what was on my mind, it built up this tremendous anxiety. And I would often have to actually leave class and pretend I had to use the restroom so I wouldn't have a panic attack or fall apart in class. So yeah, it ruled my life for a time.
Michael, I love that example. As painful as it sounds, to recognize that you had someone who was probably on a high pedestal that kind of ripped into you and affected you. But we look at you now, and we're like, anything but. I mean, the opposite of a coward is what I see in you. And I think you've shared this before, maybe another podcast, but talk about the moment when you realized, no, I don't accept that. I'm not a coward. You threw off that moniker, if you will.
I had the fortune of leading a retreat. It was called Man Alive. It was a group that you were with me, Jamie, yeah. But my father and my brother were part of this as well. And here we are leading this retreat, and I have this deep insecurity. And in one of those sessions, God clearly spoke to me. I was sitting there next to a tree listening, asking, I threw that question out there of, I know what I think of myself and I know what the world thinks of me, but God, I need to know what you think of me. And I was sitting there and it hit me very clearly. And it was just a tiny little whisper that said, you're a fearless warrior. And I heard that and I was blown away, because it's the opposite of what I thought of myself up until that point. But I so badly knew that was me and that's who I wanted to be. And that affirmation in that moment started to help me realize who I really was. And then I began to live out of that new identity. It was huge for me. Not only was I not a coward, but I was the opposite of that. And that strength that was in me was going to be required of the people around me.
I love that powerful transformation. I can see how you use that even to this day. And the guys you coach, you're calling them out to be and to become more fearless in how they're living their lives. You help man up, if you will. So I love that. Jamie, I want to turn to you. I've seen you make changes in your life, and you've told stories about that.
I remember being a part of the same Man Alive group with Michael and the other McGreevy guys. One of the messages that I got as a kid, it was a narrative that I basically spoke over and over again, is that you are not smart. You can't compete at the level of everybody else. I was told that true success was similar to McCluskey. Go to school, get good grades, and put your head down and then get something safe. Get something like become an engineer, or you like history, become a history teacher. And for me, that was just not, I couldn't do that role. For me, I had given myself this message that I was defective and that I didn't have what it took to be successful. And I specifically remember my parents in 8th grade taking me to one of these vocational open houses for high school. And the message that I got was, you can't be successful, so you need to do something with your hands. And I knew I was destined for greatness, but there just wasn't a outlet for me to be creative as an entrepreneur. I didn't see that as a path. So I was avoiding my destiny to be an entrepreneur, and I just didn't know which way to go.
I love that, because it sounds like that was something that you already knew about yourself, but yet all these other external influences were telling you something that you just said, okay, well, I guess I have to accept that because they're all in congruence, but you knew something different, but yet you suppressed that for a while. And then eventually you said, no, I'm going to throw this off.
I always sort of knew deep down that I had the ability to do great things, but I didn't know where the path was or how I could do it.
You know, Jamie, as you were talking about school, and you guys were both talking about school stuff, I'm thinking even through and processing as you're talking about my upbringing, how that and teachers and parents influenced me. And I had great parents who really pushed me to strive, to achieve, and all this stuff. And it's, part of the whole 3 as an Enneagram personality. But I'm also trying to recollect here. It was almost like I just had to assume because, hey, you're smart, you can do this, you need to achieve more. And I kind of became like the little brown noser kid, and then got to valedictorian, all these things, and it was a little bit of that educational influence of don't take necessarily the risks, but just keep on achieving and succeed, and you're going to kind of lay out your path for yourself, and then that translated into politics, and it was like my first career in politics of like going and doing what you should do, and we're going to help you succeed at that. And at some point when I hit a wall, it was like, you know what? No, I don't have to. This is not the path I have to take, and I can change course. And it was actually two of my mentors at the time who gave me very similar advice and said, you know what? You have what it takes to take on risk, to take on challenge, to do something that you want to do. And that's where I kind of embraced the idea of like, well, maybe entrepreneurship's for me. Let's give it a try. I've never really taken a lot of risks before. So thank you for kind of sharing a bit about your story and educational. We're hugging over here. It's pretty good.
No. Chris just...
That was a tender moment, guys. That was really tender. It's getting a little weird, but that was tender. Maybe something would be helpful to plug in there is where do we get these narratives from? You've heard that some of us got them from the environment that we grew up in, or a very important person in our lives, like a coach or a teacher or a pastor or whomever. The reality is that our narratives go way back to when we don't even have conscious memory. They go back to when we were first born and the sensory experiences that we got in this world as we got welcomed into the world or not so welcomed into the world. How much were you attended to? Did you get time and touch and stories read to you and songs sung over you and rocking and comfort when you were needing changed or when you were hungry or when you had a bad dream in the middle of the night? Did you get your hand held and your back scratched and your hair tousled and those kinds of connecting things? Or were you really bereft of that and you were just like, does anybody even know that I'm here? Do I need to do something dramatic in order to get attention? We're incorporating in messages, stories, things that we will begin to operating on as if they're truth simply because of our very early pre-memory experiences of the world. Now you pound on top of that then the experiences that we do begin to have conscious memory of with peers and with teachers and coaches and scoutmasters and whomever else. And so most times we can really clearly point to an overt message. They told me this, they called me that, this group wouldn't let me in, or that person really lifted me up. But other times it's stuff that we're battling. We realize, man, I don't even know what the message is. And so the first challenge is to really ask yourself, well, what does it look like is the narrative I'm operating on? What does my behavior, my actions, or my lack of action, what does that seem to indicate might be the messages that I'm operating on? And then you kind of reverse engineer it. Where would that message have come from? Sometimes the answer is it came from nothing. Not that there wasn't a genesis to it, but it came from an absence of something that should have been there. Attention, time, touch, those things that affirm us as human beings. And instead we experienced a tremendous amount of neglect. And so the early narrative was, man, I'm going to have to look out for myself. I'm going to have to figure out my way in the world. I'm not sure I even matter to other people. So I think if listeners are kind of hearing this discussion about narrative and thinking, what are mine? Those are some questions to at least pose to yourself. What do my actions and the way that I conduct myself in the world indicate might be my inner story? And where did I get that? Is it truth? Do I want a different story to be operating on?
Yeah, it's good you brought that up to understand where those come from. And part of our discussion about this topic was us on this Cuba trip a few weeks ago, realizing and seeing the stark contrast of a country and a form of government that's way different than ours, that they accepted a narrative, they accepted a story that Fidel's taking care of us. We have all that we need. And I got to just share this story. We were taking a cruise around with two awesome old cars around Havana. We had to split up into two groups, and one of the groups had a taxi driver with a tour guide who was hook, line, and sinker educated through her whole life, went to the university, was just fed everything. And so she was regurgitating, right, what she was fed as her narrative. The other car, stark difference. There was a young guy who basically said, screw Fidel, screw communism. We have seen the Americans come and tell us more truth. And he had a very, very different perspective on Cuba's past and its future. He had so much more hope and optimism and kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, really, about that. So it's just kind of neat to hear and to see the difference that even say communism versus capitalism can play. But I want to talk about, and back to that trip a little bit too, point number 2, with our narrative, there's strength in numbers. The people that we surround ourselves with now can affect our narrative. We can choose our narrative. Chris, you shared about how we've adopted a narrative from childhood before we could even speak, but yet we can identify ways to change that. So, guys, how do you, Michael, I'm going to turn to you. How do you affect your narrative now?
The biggest thing is the people that I'm spending time with. I mean, my old narrative came from people. It was the wrong narrative, but it was sent through people, the wrong type of people. So even with what we're doing here at EFM, being aligned with you in so many ways, you guys, my narrative has evolved and changed. And so making that choice over and over again to be with people who shape my narrative in a positive way and help it grow and evolve and help me become more and more of what God created me to be, that has made the biggest difference.
Chris, I want to turn to you. You're out in, admittedly, and you've said this on other podcasts, you're out in kind of the middle of nowhere, right? On a farm, and you can't see a neighbor, but yet you are very intentional about how you build community, both for yourself personally and your family. Share a little bit about that and how that's affected you and Rachel and the upbringing you want for your children too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly has to be an intentional. At least for me, I realized it had to be intentional because you heard how clueless I was. I came from a great family background. I had good general internal messages about my worth as a human being. I just didn't have any sense of direction. And, in life, eventually, life is going to kind of come along and just hand you a direction. It's going to be the pressure of bills mounting up, or it's going to be getting married, or it's going to be time just moving on. But at some point, you're going to feel pushed, forced, rather than at choice about where you find yourself in a certain season of life. So, yeah, us being on a dirt road out in the middle of nowhere in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains, that's clearly a choice. There weren't all kinds of opportunities waiting out there for me. In fact, I've often said I found pieces of myself out there that I didn't know were missing until I found them out there. But what I did know is that in conversation, principally with my wife first, and then a few other key people, including the first coach that I hired, I camped out in examination of the narratives that I was currently operating on and where that story was going to take my family now. Because it was really that we were married, I was doing very well in business, I was loving entrepreneurism, but I now had children. And the entrepreneurial business I was doing at the time took me away 5 days a week in the morning. My office was, 10-minute drive from home, but it was still like the classic going to work. Bye-bye, Daddy. And, the kids are hoping that you come home in time for dinner at night. And generally I did, but that wasn't quite the vision that I ultimately wanted and have had now these 20 years of working at home. That was the result of these conversations and choosing much more carefully, who do I bring around me? Well, it would be people that are living lives that are close to what I think I'd actually like to be living. How did you do that? What do you do differently? Man, how did you get the guts to do that? Who helped you with that? What books could you recommend? Just spending time with those who are moving in the same direction that you know you want to begin to move, you start to pull in material that can foster a different way of thinking, and that ultimately then results in a different way of being.
Yeah, that's good in terms of being so intentional and aware. You had a self-awareness, and then you made a plan to have the affirmations that you wanted to include around you and influence you at that season. Jamie, I want to turn to you about, speaking of affirmations, this trip that we were just on with 7 entrepreneurs, we had some amazing conversations around meals. and it really brings a lot of light into this exact topic. So share with us a little bit about that.
Instead of having an agenda to go through a book or a course or a certain topic, we just had these epic meals where we fellowshipped, and then we used intentional time to be together to really draw out each other's giftedness and speak life into each other. And so we picked a guy, and then we just all went around the room, and each of us said what we admired in that person, the potential that we saw that maybe they weren't maximizing or taking advantage of, in a very affirming way, to say, hey, you got this, and you're going to add more value to the people around you if you double down on that and exercise getting better, improving. But the point is, you had that in you, because it's really easy to see the gold in others and then often sort of overlook it in yourself. We went around, I think we roasted McCluskey first. We joked around a little bit, built some rapport, and then we just told him what we saw in him that just added value to everybody around him. And it was just such a rich time. It's really humbling and a vulnerable place to be, to sit in that chair and hear these things about yourself that sometimes, to be honest, you don't really embrace, because it's hard to magnify your skills and your talents and the giftedness that you have. When you have men that are amazing entrepreneurs and they start calling these things out on you, you have to realize that some of these things are not only true, but we're missing out big time if we don't own it for the sake of the other people around us.
Yeah, where else do we get this? I mean, for me, if I don't hear from other men who know me and call that out for me, where does my mind go on its own? It's self-criticism. It's breaking myself down. Oh, you didn't do this well enough, or you screwed up here, or you'll never, like, kind of that negative slippery slope. And there's a tension here. We have to acknowledge that a little bit, right? When you're out with a bunch of guys, the easy thing to do is to avoid a very intentional conversation and start talking about sports. Reach into your pocket and pull out that little thing that buzzes every couple minutes and distract yourself. But if you can just push through that little bit of awkwardness and decide that's what you're going to do, powerful things can happen. It doesn't have to be this weird emotional thing. You don't have to be an amazing psychologist or coach to do this with a bunch of guys. You just do it, right? You can step right into that, and you see other people. You see the gifts in other people. I know it's easy for me to see what's great about other people. Hard to see what's great about myself. And so I need to hear that, and I need to be reminded of that. And that's the way it's done. That was so powerful for me personally.
That's a great point, Michael, because I think most people, and probably even more so guys and entrepreneurial guys, are our biggest critics. And so left alone or to our own devices, we can have a downward spiral and kind of lose the correct narrative. So having guys around us, I mean, that's part that goes back to the garden, right? The enemy is going to say, are you good enough? Really, did he say that? And we have these questions that trying to convince us otherwise. But that was just a powerful time and a rich time, Jamie, like you said, of just speaking life into each other, really going deep. But it is, Michael, it's hard, it's awkward. It's being intentional with other guys, being authentic, being vulnerable. Boy, there was some laughter, there were some tears and welling up of eyes, but it was so powerful. It is that idea that we have to speak into guys what we view in them, because sometimes we get blinded by ourselves.
I just realized that in thinking how this may sound to some, it sounds almost like we did an exercise like you might do at a trust building thing or a team building thing. And like we went around the room and in 5 minutes, everybody said one word that comes to mind for that person. And that was like not at all what this was. We were in a country where you had no cell signal and no internet connectivity. So we didn't have any phones buzzing for 5 days. We were just together. We were not at a football game.
Or a phone on Michael's part. You know, he had no phone.
Yeah, he left his phone in the Tampa airport, so yeah. But no distractions like that, no computers, nothing on the internet. We're not at a bar. We're not watching a game. We're not over each other's house with background noise or even our wonderful wives or children around. We were together in like these little cafes where there's not much distraction, and we would start with somebody and begin pouring into that person. It was when Chris, you're saying deep, we went deep. And there were tears that were shed, both in being able to receive what was being said, but also the tears sometimes confirm that there's resonance within the person. They recognize, you are speaking truth to me. I've just never heard it before. And my own being is going, yeah.
That's powerful, Chris. It really was creating that intentional environment to allow that to happen. So as we wrap up this conversation on narrative, we just want to leave you with some questions to sit with, to ponder. What stories are you telling yourself? Have you told yourself? Where did they come from? What influenced you, maybe in a negative way that you would like to change? What do you need to do right now to stop listening to a narrative and to start crafting your own?
Thank you for listening to the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. Visit efmlife.com to connect with us and others like you who are pursuing success in enterprise, family, and marriage.